Hello and welcome to Threads of Fate. I am your host, Kira Ryberg, and this is a podcast all about astrology, divination, and the threads of fate that weave throughout all of our lives. We are joined by the stunning, the glowing, the incredible, the beautiful and brilliant Chloe Margarita to kick off the Libra Decans. Chloe, welcome back to the show.
Thank you. That grading felt very apt for starting with Libra. Uh, let's bring out let's honor the beauty in everything, and let's also acknowledge we're halfway through the decans.
I No, I cannot believe I was thinking about that before we started recording today. I'm like, wait a second, we're doing Libra. That means we're halfway through. We've already done half of the zodiac, which it feels like we should be further along. And also, how the hell are we halfway through? Like it's both and for me.
Right, because I want to get to every one of them so bad, but then it's like, no, wait. If we do Aquarius 3, then we only have 3 left.
I know. But then, bounds.
Exactly.
Bounds. And then after that, we'll do like the Decata Maria, right? Which will be like 100 and don't worry, guys. Chloe and I will be here into our 50s.
God willing. God willing.
God willing. All right. Well, today we are going to be starting our foray into the decans of Libra, starting with Libra 1. This is a moon Venus decan. So it is the Libra decan of Libra, which means it is the most Libra of Libra that we can possibly get. Chloe, give me your elevator pitch for Libra 1.
Yeah, so this being a Venus moon decan, it is in Venus's home sign of Libra. One thing that really surprised me about this is it gives me like a very different understanding of these two planets than maybe is typical. And we'll get super into it, but a huge theme of this is justice. And
Mm.
so understanding peace and understanding balance and how one deals with transgressions or breaking of oaths is a really big part of this and a big thing that's sort of unneglected when we talk about Venus. And so this is a big treat in that. But then with the moon, right, there's something more mysterious here than when first meets the eye. And I really feel like this with Libra 1 individuals.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the justice component is huge. I think there's a really big preoccupation with equality and fairness. And I think we see that theme kind of repeated throughout all of the decans of Libra in some form or another, because Libra is the sign of justice. It is the scales, it is the weighing up of right and wrong, of good and bad, right? All of that is baked in. But in this decan in particular, it feels a little bit more pronounced because of the deity that presides over this space, which is the Arianis. I don't know if I said that right, but they are the furies, right? And their task was essentially to hear the complaints brought by mortals against, people who didn't have power, to people who had power. So it's like, the young to the older people, or people who were poor to people who had money. So they would kind of like right wrongs that were committed against the innocent and hear those claims. And so I think that people who have placements here, I tend to see them taking on that kind of spirit of the Furies and feeling righteously angered by the transgressions against innocent people, the youth, people who are impoverished, people who don't hold power in our society, right? People who have different identities, right, that aren't necessarily as celebrated or accepted, or who, society doesn't work in their favor, right? So like this can be racial injustice, this can be injustices committed against trans people or anyone who identifies differently, right? And I see that placements here tend to feel very, very strongly about the fact that fairness means fairness for all, not fairness for the few.
Definitely. And I mean, it shows us something about like this sign of Libra in action where, right,
Hmm.
so what we see it is like, oh, they're just about peace and being social and chill all the time. And that's definitely a component of that. But this is cardinal air, right? This is, right, what does it actually mean to take action and initiate in the realm of connections and relationships?
Hmm.
And part of that is finding that balance. And so, this is something you mentioned before recording. It's like Libras are that devil's advocate in that they want every perspective to be included. And with that, there also has to be this getting into the process of like actually creating peace and accord means being willing to disagree, to get
Hmm.
like fights and right with a different end goal than Aries, which is much more about, well, let me get, let me struggle and toil to get my agenda across. Libra wants like what is fair for everyone, but that can take
Yeah.
some adjustment, and it might mean that some people can't be part of the community if they can't follow the rules.
Yeah, there's like a healthy discussion around what is fair and what is just. And I think in general, there can be a spirit of compromise and negotiation that we find, but that can only be obtained by hearing multiple points of view, right? We cannot come to a compromise if I don't know your take and I don't know what you want. And you can't compromise with me if you don't know my take and what I want, right? The only way that we're going to be able to meet in the middle is by hearing both sides out. And I do think that Libra one placements sometimes they like to play the role of the devil's advocate of like being on the other side. And even if they don't believe it or it's not their perspective, like, well, what about this? What about that? Because they want to spark conversation, which I think is the nature of cardinal air, right? Air is a sign that is more concerned with communication as an element, right? As a sign, as an element. And so that cardinality is going to be the initiation of a conversation or a debate, right? So that we can bring all of the different perspectives to the table. So sometimes a Libra one individual is going to play that role of saying, like, yeah, but what about this perspective? Or what about this side of things? Or what about this point of view? Even if it's not their own, because they want to kind of really assess the true nature of everything. And you can only do that by pulling all of the facts and opinions and, yeah, points of view to the table and considering them, right? And I do think there is a consideration that takes place here. And that's part of the weighing up that we see with the scales.
Yeah. And yeah, I like you're saying, and the only way you can do that is right drawing out different perspectives. And I mean, that's a thing that you see with this Decan is, yeah, being willing to hear the truth, being willing to accept that maybe you can't see eye to eye with another person, but does that always have to be a point of conflict or breakage? Like, Venus thinks that can be a point of accord. Like that is
Yeah.
how the arrangement of the rules and the guidelines and the terms of relating so everyone is appeased, right, is kind of one of the ultimate skills of this Decan and of Libra. And it's just right, that balance of still finding peace and harmony through that, because some way I see Libra is they don't naturally feel equilibrium, they have to work to make it happen through like bringing it
Yes.
blah blah blah.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's like once we can find equilibrium, then both sides can exist in peace and harmony, right? Like we have the day and we have the night. And I think that there's something interesting happening here with having two nocturnal planets as rulers of this decan in a diurnal sign, right? So there is an awareness of both the relational components and the things that often happen under the cover of night and the fulfillment that we find in those spaces brought into the diurnal light. And it's like, okay, now what ideals do we have around these things? How do we kind of create conversations and structures out in society that can hold these types of relationships as well and these different points of view and making peace for both so that they are working together rather than fighting against each other, right? Day and night don't fight against each other. One kind of bleeds seamlessly into the other and vice versa.
Yeah, I mean, someone who I think about with this Decan and is Ariana Grande, who has her movie
Mm,
here, and how,
yeah,
I mean, the past year she's been best friends with who in her movie is like her enemy, her complement, where they start enemies and then they become friends, and then it's like, ooh, maybe they're in love, but they're so opposed, right?
hmm,
Glinda, Elphaba, like from Wicked, and how they like go about things. And right, so, and it's funny, like her character in that movie, you kind of see the potential like dark side of this, which is that she's this beautiful like blonde woman who's accepted by like this conventional society in Oz, but then basically
yes,
becomes like the beautiful face of like fascism and like committing atrocities, because she so much clings to the accord and the niceness that comes with like being that face versus like exiling herself to actually try to make change. Like that's too much of a risk for her.
yeah, totally. I just had to look up like when Wicked first began coming out, and apparently they began previews on Broadway on October 8th, 2003, and Mercury was in Libra one. So there you go. Great example, Chloe.
Thank you. And right, but it makes me think too of like her life is one of trauma in a lot of ways.
Yeah, totally.
Like this bombing happening at one of her shows, and then right? Her ex Mac Miller, died of an overdose, but then getting blamed for that. And, through that all, it's like, her response, and I don't think it would have been productive, would have been to fight or to like be pissed off, even though she had every right to, but was to just like provide support and help, right? She gave so much. Like she had like a benefit show for like the
Yeah.
victims of like Manchester bombing. And like even when, she wasn't with this person, Mac, she like, you know, wrote a whole song about him. She
Yeah.
clearly was like still relating to him and loving him, even if
Yeah.
they like be together. And I think, yeah, I think she's gotten, from some flack for that,
For sure.
she doesn't wear her trauma, or she doesn't like, always, present it to the world. She kind of like, has kind of needed like a sense of remove or like space. And you can, even if she's out in public, like we don't know what's happening with her private life right now. And I think that is sort of like the lunar component of like this being a diurnal sign. What do you share with the world and put out there, and what is sort of for you? And maybe part of that is like you just need to give yourself, space and time to process.
Yeah, well, I think also that makes me think of so many things, but one of them is that Libra is Saturn's exaltation, and that Saturn has the majority of bounds in this decan as well. So there is very much a Saturnian feeling of so that distancing, right, around like how much do I share, how much do I keep for me, what's public, what's private, right? What distance should I take with that? I think is definitely coming through here. But the other thing that it's making me think of, which I really feel like we started to unearth in Cancer 1, which was the last Moon Venus decan that we looked at, is the instability that comes from Moon Venus connections, right? And we tend to think of the Moon and Venus together as a planetary pairing as being very sweet, but it's also unstable, right? The moon moves faster than any other planet. Sometimes she's waxing, sometimes she's waning, sometimes she's talking to malefics, sometimes she's talking to benefics. Like her state, her only constant is change, right? And so when we have Moon Venus, that means we are bringing that kind of constant change into our relationship dynamics, into our creative worlds, and we have to hold space for the fact that that means there's going to be ups and downs. There's going to be different iterations, different eras, different ways in which you relate and express yourself creatively, romantically, in forms of desire and pleasure and all of that. Which also, if you think about Ariana Grande's kind of like discography as a whole, right, has ranged from like Nickelodeon star to kind of rap and R&B to very pop to musicals, and she can go in a lot of different directions and has explored many different directions because there has to be an element of change present, because that is what the moon and Venus demand as a pairing. And the more that you try to cling, the more you are going to be met with resistance, I think, and there's not going to be as much flow, as acceptance, or as much enjoyment in the process, quite honestly.
Especially seeing this as the right first of three decans here, and seeing if you want to see Libra as a process, you can see it as a process of relating.
Yeah.
And the first step, despite this, very, I think because of this strong Saturnian influence too, is like when you first meet someone, like there has to be that space of unknowing, of
Mm,
like something I think a lot about is you can't, until you've known someone a year, like seen a full, 4 seasons with them, like you don't actually know their energy levels and, them intimately. And anything before that, even though there is, you have your intuition, right? The moon here, it speaks to like you can sense when someone is maybe for
yeah,
you, something there.
totally.
But to think that where that's going or who that person is going to be, especially when like the cuteness kind of wears off after the first few months, like is a fool's errand. Like
Hmm.
so there has to be this like this back and forth with the Venus of like, okay, you see something you like and you want to build with that. But the moon knows things change. And so, giving it space to develop in its own time is a key for initiating relationships in a healthy way.
Yeah, exactly. And I think not wanting to own or lock something down, right? Which can be a struggle because you have Saturn's bounds in the majority of this decan, which is going to kind of be more inclined to want to commit really quickly right? But there's also what you're talking about is like the distance is necessary and time is another Saturnian signification. So taking your time with things and seeing how they unfold when there are those ebbs and flows and ups and downs and different iterations is really important before you invest, right? For the
Yeah.
long term, which is what we see in the second decan when the commitment is made, right? So there's kind of that this process in Libra of like the introduction of a different perspective or a different idea, point of view, a relationship, right? And in the second deck, and we commit to that. And then the third, we kind of try to find equilibrium as we maybe go beyond the confines of that commitment and explore multiple options and ways of doing things and kind of get a little bit more wild after being really contained for a bit. And Libra is so fun. But yeah, I think that there's a lot there, right, that we could pull apart. I think the relationship component is really strong here. Something else that I think of a lot with this decan is the relationship that it has to commerce, which is not necessarily something that we tend to think of with the moon and Venus, right? It's like this is the creative, lovey sort of pairing that's so sweet. But Libra as a sign is also very good at selling, right? Negotiating, compromising, presenting something in a beautiful way to get your interest and to make you attracted to it, right? It's pleasing. And the scales that we find as the imagery of Libra are also going to talk about the weighing up of buying and selling, which when we think about, the image description that's left to us by even Ezra is my favorite for this one. And he says it's a man in a shop in the market with scales in his hand, and he wishes to buy and sell. And I just love that because it's not what we think about when we think of Libra is like this commercial kind of quality to it. But at the same time, when you have that scale and you are weighing things up and there is an exchange and there's me over here, the buyer, and you over there, the seller, that is a relationship as well, just like a romantic relationship. Might not be the first one that pops to mind when we think about relating to other people, but we do it all the time. You talk to your cashier when you're buying groceries, you talk to the waitress when you're buying, your food. Like there is connections that show up there. And I do think that that kind of underpins some of this pop off.
You can tell. I'm just like
I can tell. I know you're just like building, and I'm like, okay, go.
I I have been around Libras my whole life. My brother and my mom are both Libra. My mom has her son in this decan.
Okay.
And my whole life, she still is. She was a salesperson.
Yeah.
She's so good at it because she's first and foremost a relational person. And she says this, you want to buy from people who you like doing business with.
Yes.
And she is like, and I think it's part of her charm with this is, even though it's like, she's not, I don't know, being a pushover, she's making the deal, but she cares about people and she cares about making connections. So like right now, she's like in her like semi-retirement era. She's running like this wine tour of the Willamette Valley. And it's
We
just
love this for her.
like go into like the like wine country in Oregon and just, she goes to all of these events that these wineries hold. She, regularly goes and volunteers with them, right?
Mm-hmm.
She's doing things for them. And then with that, like, when part of the reason that people like going to her is because she has those relationships where like she'll get the special treatment when she's there because they just love interacting with her. You get to meet the winemaker, you get to go in the behind the scenes. That only happens not because it's like in the official guidebook, but because people love to be, it's like, oh, it's Michelle. Like, of course.
Yeah. Yes.
Game, right. And I think it's that relational thing where it's like, yes, you're still getting benefit from it, but sales is relationship. Right. And I feel like it's in my business, and I feel like you're the same way, where it's like being generous, like offering plenty, like for free, and making it so there's not this sense of coercion to buy from you. You feel excited and you know that this is something valuable, and there's an exchange to it of like, I'm offering you something, and giving me money is not me taking something from you. It's honoring what I'm giving back.
Totally. On that note, guys, this is my free offering. So like that video, give it a 5-star review. That's the exchange we're doing here. Okay.
Exactly.
No, but I think it's so true. And I do see this with clients a lot is like there is an ability to wheel and deal here to kind of negotiate and use your relational skills to like it's the kind of person who the restaurant is all booked up, right? And there's like, we have no spots. And they go and they're like, let me just talk to the hostess, right? Or the host. And they have a conversation and they're nice. And all of a sudden, wouldn't you know it, a table is open, right? They can get you the reservations at the spot. They can get you the deal that you thought you couldn't make, right? They're very good at finding the compromise and by negotiating, but also by being personable and likable, right? That's the Moon Venus thing. There is a sweetness there. The sweetness can be steely sometimes because of Saturn, which is why like things actually get done, right? Like we're not just like living in the land of sweetness and ideas, but we're actually saying like, hey, like let's do a little deal here, it'll benefit you, it'll benefit me. We had this nice little interaction. Wouldn't you rather help me out? And excuse me, I have to cough. It also makes me think about, sometimes like we go to the farmers market every single Sunday. And as one does in France. And sometimes my husband will be like, "Oh no, we can just get that at the store tomorrow." And I'm like, I don't want to give the corporation my money. I want to give this nice guy who came out here my money because he talks to me every week. He gives my daughter a banana for free every time. Like, of course, I would rather give him my money than give it to like whatever corporation of the, big chain grocery store because that's the relational component. Like I know that it's going into this guy's pocket. He's going to be able to benefit him and his family and his kids and, like runs it with his dad, I think. Like, they're very cute and like they're so sweet. And I think there is that component there of like, oh yeah, like I want to do the deal with the nice guy, right? And like people want to do the deal with your mom because she's sweet and she's relational and she prioritizes connection. And I think when we miss out on just how important that element of things is, it's like, well, you're really losing your ability to like market and to make sales and to get the deal done, right? Like no one wants to do a deal with an asshole. And I think Libra one is really good at kind of showing up with a spirit that people want to get a deal done with.
Yeah, it just, yeah, I mean, there's so many ways where it is so relational. And I think speaking personally, I kind of had to realize that because I only saw like sales and marketing as exploitive because
Mm,
like we live in a capitalist society where a lot of that is, or there
yeah.
is lack of like connection to the thing. And just as you were talking about the commerce, like that's one of my favorite things to bring up with like Moon Venus people is like it can be really like spiritual and emotional and flowy, but it can also just be very concrete of like the moon is physical things and
Yes.
Venus is how we value them. And so
Hmm.
like your relationship to objects, to the things you have in your life, are they ethically sourced? Are they local? Are they the best quality? Right? It just makes me think of like it's been really easy for me, like, no judgment to anyone who does it, but it's been really easy for me to not buy on Amazon because at
Mm,
a certain everything on Amazon is crappy. Like it's not good quality. So like sure, maybe I can't get the like, $20 whatever sent to my house, but it's just going to degrade or, fall apart because the way that, Mr. Bezos has set it up is to just, convenience and as
yeah.
quick as possible and
Yeah.
while also exploiting, the people who sells through it, but there's kind of, they feel like they have no choice. And there's a real power. I mean, there's also a real privilege to be able to be intentional about like, I'm gonna like
Definitely.
invest a little more in something that is ethically made. And usually when there's care put into it, it's going to like, Saturnian way last like a longer bit of time. And so I also see with like Libra one people, like my mom included, like really getting into what's the best
Quality.
quality and not
Totally.
that not being frivolous. Like that's how we make our lives. That's how we create beauty.
Yes, I think that's a Libra. I think that's a Libra principle in general. And since this is the Libra decan of Libra, it's more pronounced here, right? Like there is a desire for quality and refinement. It's not about the most expensive thing, it's about the most well-made thing, right? Like I can enjoy a $5 bottle of wine if it's really great wine. I could also enjoy the $100 bottle of wine if that's really great wine. Like it doesn't matter, right? Is kind of like the message here. It's the experience of it. It's does it please your senses, right? Does it taste good? Does it smell good? Does it sound good? Is it beautiful? Is it something that makes life worth living and showing up for? Right? Because I think the moon and Venus as a pairing, they often want us to get into our senses and to have an experience where we can actually appreciate beauty when it shows up. And that means beauty can arrive in many, many different forms, and we have to be open and willing and receptive to the different ways that it might show up and meet us in the moment.
Right. I mean, it reminds me of like, artist way stuff.
Yeah, for sure. I know I was saying that. I was like, this is so
It's
artist way coded of me.
because it is like a big part of that book is like making your life nice, like doing little artist dates for yourself, like buying
Yeah.
yourself little treats, like that fills up the artist well, like it's not frivolous. And similarly, like the lesson for this week is very much like we have this idea that like God is stingy, or that
Yeah.
like God would never try to help us, buy something nice for ourselves or enroll in
Yeah.
a paint. And it's like, why? Because you think beautiful, creative things are not spiritual,
Yeah.
right? It's interesting. Like interesting that thought is there. And of course, it's like my head is like, is that a tinge of misogyny? All right, you're
Mm-hmm.
associating the Venusian realm with what is not serious.
Yeah.
Um,
Seriously.
it's so true of like to live an artful, fulfilling life. In this book, it says, all of us are artists, all of us are
Yeah.
creative,
Yeah.
is to take those moments, right? Again, that lunar space away from practicality and doing things to, allow something more beautiful and mysterious to come about.
Yeah, and that it can be found through simple pleasures, right? Like it can be something as simple as like putting a flower by your bed so there's beauty there every day, right? That you feel good when you go to sleep and good when you wake up, and that those little moments are actually what make up a life. So prioritizing beauty and pleasure and aesthetic sensibility and delight is actually a way of honoring your existence as something that should be pleasurable rather than something that has to be hard and difficult. And that doesn't mean that there's no hardship or difficulty for Libra one placements, but I do think that there is more of an orientation towards how do I make this enjoyable actually? How can I beautify this moment, this experience, this relationship, this interaction with this other person, right? So that we both come out of it better than we entered it.
Right. And that's something that I really appreciate about the Libra one people in my life is like they remind me, yeah, that to like take your time to like make things nice is worth it. I think
Yeah.
of Georgia O'Keeffe, who has her Venus here. But obviously she's known for her like beautiful paintings of flowers and skulls, but people also are obsessed with like her wardrobe and
Hmm.
the interior design and the way that she lived her life, especially in her older years in New Mexico. And you can visit her former compound, and
Yeah.
it's like she's like a style inspiration, which is not very common for painters necessarily.
Yeah.
And I think it speaks to like the Venusian. It's not just in the discrete things she makes; it infuses like her whole being.
Yes, and letting it infuse your being, I think, is like a really good way to think about this Decan, right? Like my queen Yoko Ono has her ascendant here, and I think that she is just like the pinnacle of this Decan in so many ways. She's an artist and she's a creative. She's also someone who's very well known for her relationships and for being committed and connected to different people in different realms of, musicality and artistry. The guy that she dated after John Lennon was actually her interior designer that used to like source antique goods for her and stuff like that. Right. So there is the relational component, but there's also that message of peace and how important peace is and justice is. And it's something that she fought for in her own way throughout her entire life and has always been a message of imagine a world without war and difficulty and pain and sorrow. And how can we bring more hope and beauty and love and positivity into the world so that we can prioritize that, right? And I think even like I think of her as kind of like a style icon in her own way. Like she's a weird one, but she's so cool, like she's just undeniably chic in every way, and she did a lot of different forms of art too, which I think gets back to that kind of shapeshifter thing we were talking about with the moon and Venus, right? Those different iterations of relationships and eras and styles, right? Like she's a poet and she's also done paintings and she's done art installations and live performances and has done so many music, right? There's been so many different realms that she has dabbled in, and they all kind of make up the whole, and neither is better than another. It's just different ways to express yourself creatively by being present and allowing whatever wants to come from you to come from you, right? And I think that's part of the creativity of this Decan is not imposing a certain type of idea of what should come out, but just letting it express in whatever way it wants to.
Yeah, one of my favorite artists, David Wojnarowicz, who was really like a gay activist artist who died of AIDS like in the 90s. And he has his Mercury here in the first house. And he was known for visual art. And, he has the jacket that says, like, if I die of AIDS, don't bury me, like, drop me.
Yes, 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 yes.
Yeah, yeah. And he also is also an incredible writer. He has this like kind of memoir, like fusion, like philosophical deep thoughts book called Close to the Knives. And
Okay.
it's so like beautiful and sad and gorgeous. And just the fact that he's an artist and also like wrote one of my favorite books is just shows like the quality of his work. But there's this really great passage towards the end where he's like reckoning with like so many of his lovers and friends dying, and he's like watching like this bull being killed by this matador. And then at the end of every paragraph he just repeats, smell the flowers while you can.
Yeah, yeah. That's such a moon Venus thing to me is like smelling the flowers while you can. It's such a big part of that, right? The flower's gonna die, you're gonna die, so you better enjoy it while it's there and just make the most of that moment. And I can't help but think too, a little bit of that kind of relationship to death is also one coming through Saturn's influence here, but also the fact that like if you have Libra 1 placements, you very well might have Virgo 3 placements too. And we just did that episode, which is all about endings and death and corporality. So that might be worth a listen too. But yeah, someone else who really embodies that shapeshifter in different mediums of creative expression is Halsey, right? She's a musical artist. She's also a poet. She's written a book of poetry. She's also a really good painter. Like,
Wow.
somewhat unknowingly, but like she like did a whole thing where she painted like her album art. She's very, very into like concept art. Like I remember one time I saw like a painting where my husband was like standing behind me. He was like, "Oh, what's that? Like that's really good." I was like, "Oh, it's like some Halsey painting." He's like, "That's better than any of the music that I've heard from her." He's not a really big Halsey guy, but like it's just to say that like sometimes the art forms that can come out of this Decan are unexpected and maybe not even what we would associate with the individual, but that doesn't mean that there's not a talent or a skill set there because I really do think that like a creative shapeshifter might be one way to think about this Decan, on top of the fact that she's also someone who's very concerned with justice and fairness and equal rights and is constantly advocating during the like raids in LA when there was all of those protests going on. She was like being out on the streets, being a street medic for people because I think her mom was a nurse or something like that, right? So there is also that preoccupation with justice and fairness and equality. Something that I do want to make sure that we talk about is where that can get a little bit fuzzy, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Go.
because I think, one's idea of justice is not always another person's idea of justice or fairness or what is right. And I fell off my chair when I realized that Linda Tripp has her midheaven here. And if you guys don't know who Linda Tripp is, she is the woman who submitted tapes of her private conversations with Monica Lewinsky in order to get Clinton kind of impeached, but basically was the reason that the entire Monica Lewinsky, Bill Clinton scandal erupted, right? And her whole thing was like, I'm a crusader for justice and like I am doing a moral good, right? That I am being righteous by going forth and putting myself on the line and my friendship on the line so that I can protect America. And I just got to say, you know, the outcome of that was like not what she was hoping for, obviously, but also justice for who, right? Because like you've just ruined this woman's life. You've destroyed her confidence. You've destroyed your friendship and your relationship with her in order to tell people that Bill Clinton is a bad dude. They already knew there was already cases against him, right, for sexual misconduct and different things of that nature. And so I do think that sometimes someone's idea of fairness or justice can be imposed upon others when they have placements here. And that is not always what another person is going to look at and be like, that felt really fair. Like, I don't think that Monica Lewinsky looks back on that and was like, thank God for that act of justice that Linda Tripp did,
Right.
right?
It's like it wasn't the person in the Epstein files who was punished for that.
Ding, ding, ding.
And I, and
Exactly.
it's and I think what you're also pointing to is like as much as we want to idealize justice, like we live in a society, and again,
Don't
we live in
we?
a society that hates women. Uh,
Don't we?
well, right, and I think it's Britney Spears has her ascendant here,
She
and
does.
it reminds me of I think I might have even brought this up. Like, there's this SAS Rain Fisher Kwan who has this idea of getting womaned, which is just like if you're a woman who's around enough in the public eye, we will tear you down and hate you at some point. And even like it's insane to me that Britney was just in the, in the throes of her conservatorship was so clearly like buckling from all of the stress and pressure that comes with like being a big pop star. And
Yeah.
we made fun of her and we kind of socially punished her
100%.
after idealizing her as like the peak paragon of like youthful beauty and femininity. And I think that's a thing that I see a lot where we have people like, I mean, Bill Clinton, who has a lot of stuff here, and then Leo
Yeah.
DiCaprio, who clearly has another relationship to femininity. But I also want to say, like, I also see like a lot of like masculine or male people in my life who have placements here. Like, at its best, it can make them very sympathetic and
Yes.
understanding women in a way that's not just like, oh, like, well, let's protect the women, but it's like, oh, actually, like, in my experience, spending time with men and women, I prefer women.
Yeah. And I think that it can go either or, and that's the scales, right? It can go in one direction or it can go in another. Like with Bill Clinton, who has ascendant Mars and Neptune here, which is just quite a doozy of placements, right? There is a delusion present around like the harm that he is perpetuating towards women, in which he probably does feel like righteous and justice. And yet, like, how many times is your name in the Epstein files, right? How many women have you sexually aggressed? How many times have women come up and shared their stories and been brave enough to speak about the harms that you have perpetuated against them, all for you to be like, I'm a good guy, And like, not really, not really. But his idea of justice might be that he is a good guy. And that can be part of one, maybe like the Neptunian delusion and the fog and the haze a little bit around your own actions. But I do think that there can be that warping there too of like your idea of justice being different from another person's and having to square up with the fact that there are two sides of the scales. And that means that sometimes you are going to feel right when the other person is wrong. And sometimes you're going to be wrong when the other person is right. And knowing how to navigate this decan definitely is going to be a place of, yeah, remembering that, right? Remembering that there's two points of view. And I think of that a lot with the tarot card that is associated with this decan, which is the Two of Swords, right? Which is like a woman who is sitting in front of an ocean and she has two swords in her hand and they're kind of crossed in front of her. I'm going to go ahead and bring up that image for anybody watching the video version. And there's a moon in the background and she's blindfolded, right? And I always think of this as kind of like a reminder of balance and also of alternate perspectives and holding kind of two pokey things at the same time and trying to find peace within that dynamic. How do you feel about the Two of Swords and its relationship to Libra One?
Like it's so mysterious, right? I mean,
Yeah.
there's in there's this ocean, she's blindfolded, we don't know what she's feeling, but right, she has these swords up as if to say like stop, pause. And so that's often what it feels like when it comes up is like take time to think, like now is not the time to make a decision. And I think that's sort of like the lunar relational thing with this. This is like this is not right. Mars has his detriment in Libra, so the Sun has
Yes.
their fall here. Like being certain and being too quick with your action is sort of counter, especially to this Decan. And I know I was mentioning before, one of my friends, Sam, has her ascendant here, and her first tattoo is going to be of the Two of Swords.
Yeah.
And I was talking to her about it, and she's like, she sees this card as kind of like a no. I kind of see it as like a not right,
Interesting.
right? Of like let things kind of dawn on you. So that's part of it. And I think it also speaks to like there's this interesting relationship to intuition, right? And to not like thought in like a Mercury way, but thought in a lunar way,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
going back to what you're saying about Bill Clinton, right? I think the real success from this Decan and actually being ethical comes like to see people as extensions of yourself, or do you see them as things that help you grow, who also have perspectives, who should impact you? And that process takes more time than you just following your own agenda.
Totally. Yeah. It's so interesting that you take it as a not right now and she takes it as a no. I think of it as like a message to consider the other side. And I wonder if that's also because of the card I'm going to show the people watching the video version. The one that I use for the deck that I use personally the most is this woman balancing on like a little platform and she's doing tree pose from yoga, and she has a blindfold on and the two swords, but between the two swords there is like daylight on one side and night on the other, which to me is like the, again, that blending of diurnal and nocturnal here, but also to me is saying like, see what this looks like in the light of day and in the evening, and kind of hold space for the fact that there might be another perspective or another side to this that you're not seeing quite yet, right? That's part of the fact that she's blindfolded, is like she doesn't have all of the answers and she feels very placid in her expression on her face. We don't know how she's feeling. And so it's like, to me, it's a keep your cool, stay composed, and be aware that there's another side to this that you maybe haven't seen yet or haven't considered. And that might provide you with the answers that you're seeking.
Right. And with that, like there's a lot of wisdom in uncertainty or not
Yeah,
knowing, or,
totally.
like, my one of my favorite quotes is the Dalai Lama saying like wisdom is patience and unfolding complexity.
Mm,
Like that. And I feel like speaks to this Saturnian thing of like not everything is revealed at once, right? Just like with, relationships, we don't know what they're actually going to be like until we experience them. Like you yeah, there's a real gift you give yourself, especially if you have placements here to, yeah, hear other perspectives, take your time, and yeah, rather than trying to force something through, like trust that it can maybe be more of a compromise or a both and.
yeah, it makes me think of John Lennon, who has his Mars here. And like, in order for him to really experience like the breadth of his creativity, he also had to like go and seek out another relationship with a different person and a different creative collaborator that allowed him to experience a whole other side of himself, right? That was not Paul McCartney, but was Yoko Ono, right? And someone who comes from a different background, who had different spiritual inclinations than him and had a totally alternate perspective. And in doing that, he also felt like he was able to free himself of restrictions he didn't even know were placed on him artistically and otherwise, because sometimes you can't see it when you're in it. And when you get out of it, you're like, oh, wow, look at what this other person brought to the table that I didn't even know I needed. Right. So there can certainly be a relational component to this. I love that they both have, Yoko and John both have a placement here. I think it's so cute. But that relationship can also be the counterpoint that you're seeking, or the other perspective. Sometimes it comes through a dialogue, sometimes it comes through, another person or the other, which is something that we're going to see in Libra in general as a sign that is more concerned with we than me.
And I think with that, if you have placements here, like you your life and how it goes is very impacted by the people around you and the
Yeah.
relationships you're, and thus being not letting that sort of skate by of like, oh well, I don't, this person is, kind of mean or doesn't really treat me well or doesn't let me access this part of myself, like that will directly impact your flourishing and what you're here to do. And not resisting the superficial piece. So, well, let's just, I'll just compromise with them. I'll keep in relationship with them. It's like not really it. Like there has to be some, yeah, some that like long-term Saturnian bravery of like, okay, like as much as, I can love anyone, I can care for anyone, like being willing to change the form of a relationship or go towards those who allow you to access more of yourself, who want to hear your
Mhm.
perspective too, is going to be so impactful.
Totally. I mean, I think there's a whole thing in Libra about keeping yourself small in order to honor the other person and their ability to take up space. And it's like the sun falls in Libra for a reason. And it's because the ego and one's own selfhood does not thrive in a space where you are constantly compromising and acquiescing to another person's desire in order to maintain relational harmony. Right. And that can also be something that is not a benefit to either party, right? You keep making yourself small, 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 small. Like, what does that do? That builds resentment because you're not being yourself. And then all of a sudden, we have like the kind of more petty side of Libra that comes out when in reality, if you would be willing to take up more space and also be in relationship with people who encourage that instead of kind of take advantage of your natural inclination to acquiesce, everyone benefits, right? We don't want to be in situations where it's only the other person who's kind of saying, like, oh, seems like this person just shrinks when I take up more space. That means I can take up more space. Like, no, 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 no. No, that's not who we want to be relating with, Libra one. Run. Red flag.
No, it's so true. And something, I've been thinking a lot about in my life is just how there seems to be this emphasis in like, modern relationships on like, oh, if they wanted to, they would, which like true. But if it's like, oh, so you're only relating to someone if they please you all the time, if they give you what you want, that's love. Hmm,
Mm,
like where's the relating in that, like because that's
yeah.
also kind of a form of control or manipulation. And like this is I don't have any placements here, but this is definitely something I've noticed in myself of like, oh, I'll please them, I'll sacrifice this for them, and then they'll do the same for me. And
Yeah.
then it's like okay, so you're building a relationship that basically forces you to not be real or share your truth, to like that's not true relating. And
Yeah.
so I think there's something here of like the bravery to actually be like, oh well, actually, like I want to relate to you, but I don't want that to be at the expense of myself.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And being willing to take responsibility for your actions in the ways that maybe you are also contributing to a dynamic that maybe isn't the best or that is harmful for the group. Like, this is, I just needed to find a way to mention this, which is the fact that Justin Timberlake has his Saturn
Yeah.
here. And the thing of like, this is gonna ruin the tour when he got pulled over, right? It was like he couldn't face his own actions because he's like, oh no, this is going to impact other people, right? Which, like, true, but also then, like, take responsibility for your actions as well and, like, step up to the plate a little bit, right? And when justice is, served, basically, when you're getting caught out for the things that you're not supposed to be doing, be willing to recognize that instead of like, oh no, I'm going to ruin it for everybody else. It's like, are you proud of what you did though? Like, and the impact that it's going to have on your life and your family. And I think we get into that kind of diurnal nocturnal thing where he wasn't like, oh my God, like my wife is going to kill me. My kids are going to kill me. It's like, this is what this is going to do to the tour, you know?
Right. Or I think of the Super Bowl incident with Janet Jackson, where the
Oh my
right she
God. Yeah.
was exposed, right? Through no she was exposed because of him,
Yes.
right? Oh, I just looked at her chart. She has her lot of fortune in the first decan of Libra, right? So his Saturn is on her lot of
Oh
fortune.
my God.
Her career was basically ruined because
Yep.
of it.
Yeah.
He defended her. He never apologized. He never owned up until like few years ago when people are like, hey, actually, that was kind of fucked up. And
Yeah.
Janet didn't deserve that. And now we're stuck with him. Like, and he only did it when it was convenient for him
Mm.
rather than actually trying to be relational and own up like, hey, this is unfair, right? Because again, like Janet Jackson was the woman in this situation. So she was going to be, lambasted regardless, and he didn't rise to the occasion.
Yeah, which is unfortunate because this Decan does want you to rise to the occasion. It wants you to correct injustice in the world and the injustices that you perpetuate yourself. Not everyone's perfect and, perfectly fair and equal at all times as much as we might strive to be. And even in the Agrippa quote about this image, right, for this Decan, he's like, the operation of this Decan is in justifying and helping the miserable and the weak against the powerful and the wicked. So if you find yourself in a position of power, do you then become wicked? Or are you actually going to use that position of power and status and authority to then correct the injustices in the world around us, right? Or are you going to be like, oh, well, I knew about Epstein, but I didn't really tell anybody, right? Like, or are we letting sleeping dogs lie? Which I actually think reminds me that I think that's a big thing that Austin Coppock talks about is like with this Decan is how much do you say and how much do you not? Like, do you go forth and do you ring the bells and do you alert everybody to the injustices that are taking place? Or do you just kind of roll over and go back to sleep and kind of protect your own peace? And I think part of it is saying if you find yourself in a position of power, you better be using that appropriately.
Right. Or do you care? Are you sticking up for this injustice when it's only convenient for you or it's already popular? Like there's kind of that adage of
A
like,
virtue signaling.
yeah, or like, in it's really easy to hate Nazis in Nazi Germany like 100 years
Yes.
after. But like when there's genocide happening in Palestine right now, when there's immigrants being sent off to concentration camps now, like
Say it.
speaking up. Are you saying there's a real things? Or are you, oh, it's actually more complicated and actually getting into the technical like use your heart and soul. Like, and if you
Yeah.
can't that, like there's an alignment to power and to certainty and comfort that is gonna kill us all. Like I hate to say.
Yeah. No, but seriously, if you're looking at what's going on in the world right now and you're like, well, no problems there, like, please please look in the mirror and reflect on why you think that is, because the horrors are horrific and getting more and more horrifying by the day. And you should be able to recognize those injustices and speak out against them. And I do think that that's something that people with Mercury here are pretty good at doing, right? Like I'm thinking of Bella Hadid has like Mercury and Rahu here, right? Has been a staunch advocate for the Palestinian people and raising awareness, being shadow banned on Instagram and having her account get messed with and hacked and all of these things because she's simply saying like, hey, there's a genocide happening here. These are people, these are families. This shouldn't be occurring, right? You are wiping out a population of people. That's not okay. And instead of people being like, wow, that's really good that she's speaking up for these injustices, they're like, what if we silenced her, right? And she has refused to be silenced in that respect, which I really respect, honestly.
Right. And just because you are, plugging up your ears and closing your eyes, it's not going to go away.
Yeah.
Right. I think that it's interesting that, the Two of Swords here like shows this blindfold. So there can be this thing of like, well, this is too much conflict. This is too much to think about. I'm going to disengage. But
Yeah.
it's also speaking to, oh, like, okay, but can that inward looking also be a way for you to gather and most wisely act to respond to the moment? Because I mean, that's especially like in light of, we just did this 2026 forecast. Like there is a before 2026 and an after. Like everything is going to change. And then with
Indeed.
that, like I'm also thinking it's like, how like is like what is my vision for my life and how much of that is even going to be around in a few years? Like, and
Yeah.
I think the thing I see with Libra people too is like, how does your individual sort of lunar life actually fit into the society that's happening? And how can it acknowledge that and incorporate that into your plans? And also, how can, you think of how can my life be of benefit to others
Hmm.
and maybe be a source of community when, we can't trust those in power?
Yeah, or just a source of inspiration or creativity, right? Like I think of just the power of art to bring us together and to make us feel something when everything is kind of designed to turn us off and desensitize us to pain and violence and harm and injustice, and how art often makes us really uncomfortable because it forces us to look at those things head on, right? And really acknowledge the ways in which maybe certain things aren't fair and certain people are hurting, and that, that's not always going to be, yeah, like you can turn a blind eye to those injustices, which makes me think of the Two of Swords, or you can open your heart and you can act from a place of compassion and you can create from that place and you can show people that there is beauty in the world as much as there is horrors.
Yeah, and basically every successful revolutionary movement has had like folk songs, has had like
Hmm.
morale through the form of art and connection. And I even
Yes.
think of like, you know, we see the Black Panthers in our societies, these evil, radical, Black people with guns. But what they did materially was like feed children. They
Yeah.
gave free to children and gave like safe spaces for community to gather for the greater good. And to an unjust government, that is extremely dangerous.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's making me think of like John Lennon and Yoko Ono having their honeymoon be like a bed-in protest, right? Where they were like protesting from bed against war. Right. And they're like, we're going to spread a message of peace, both of them having placements here, right? By showing people, our ideas and our creativity and, answering questions as like reporters came to their little protest and all of this. But there are, yeah, ways of kind of vocalizing and putting ideas out there that can help us, even when they seem frivolous or silly, right? To also have two of, the biggest names in the world at that time being like, hey, actually, maybe we shouldn't be fighting in these wars. Maybe actually we should be, prioritizing peace. Maybe they didn't do it in the most radical way, but they're still putting their message out there. And I think that was really at the heart of a lot of what Yoko was doing throughout her life was like, how much can I push this message of peace in everything I do? And I think that that is really inspiring and is kind of like a constant thread of her creative process and outlet. And, I think the more that we can lean into that, the more we can also find inspiration and hope in hard times. And I think Libra one individuals can remind us of the power of art.
Yeah, and that like compassion or little acts of care is radical. Like I think of right
Yes.
what's happening in Minnesota, where it's like communities coming together, like bringing food to immigrants so they don't have to leave their house,
Yeah.
being a witness to ICE activity. And you see like the administration and these ICE agents being so mad because they believe that everyone is like them, that they are amoral, that they don't care about anyone else. At their core, they just want violence and destruction. And to see that actually most people like care about being decent and good
Yeah.
and connect with other people, like I said, is extremely controversial, and that's part of why you see like all this activity. It's like why was Renee Good like a white woman like defending these like brown immigrants? Why is Alex Preddy a man trying to help a woman? Like that's not what in their world what you should be doing, and yet this
Yeah.
is what makes them stronger, and they hate it, but it's
Yep.
powerful.
Yeah, it is powerful. And it's an important stand to take against what's happening, and I'm not sure where we'll be when this episode comes out, but if you guys haven't donated and have the means to stand with Minnesota is a good.com is a good place. They have GoFundMe's, they have orgs on the front lines that you can donate to, emergency legal funds for people who have been detained of different nationalities and descent. So that could be a good place to do some Libra One patronage if the circumstances haven't improved by the time this episode gets out. Yeah. Well, that was, we went a lot of places with this one. I want to know about your flower essence that you made for this. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so it was my final essence in New Mexico. It was one of my final days, and yeah, outside of this house that I was staying at, there was just this beautiful coral yucca plant. So it's these like
Mm.
green pointy leaves within this like stalk of pink, and it was like in this very like it was out by the driveway, like it was in this very like kind of rocky part of the landscape, but it was yeah, it was like this final moment, before I was, going to leave. I think it was like the day I made it the day I left. And it was just a
Yeah.
moment, quiet reflection, like coming back to the land and everything around me to just like a final moment of like presence and like a send off before I was going to like truck all the way back to Oregon. And so it's a thing that is, it brings a lot of beauty, but I also think of like the yucca, right? It's like a desert plant. And so
Hmm.
it's dry, on the outside, but that's because it can conserve water, right? And it can
Yeah.
meet it out carefully so it can sustain itself through the kind of long dry spell. And yeah, that's sort of like the energy that it has is just like giving yourself the little bit of nourishment while still sort of having like the big view of like, okay, where is this going and where is this ending up? Yeah, how to prepare for the longer journey and have the journey itself be lush and beautiful in spite of like what's happening out there.
Yeah, I love that. It also feels very contemplative in nature, which feels very Two of Swords, right? Think it through, process, be with your feelings, the good ones and the hard ones at the same time, right? That Moon Venus stuff. Hold space for the good emotions and all of the ones that also make you a little bit uncomfortable. And the more that you sit with that, the more that you can acknowledge the beauty in life as well and the value of your relationships and your values in general. So I think that's beautiful.
It's not just about acting and efforting all the time. It's like there's
Yeah,
great agency and profundity in taking a step back and letting the world
absolutely.
teach you. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I think we did Libra one justice, pun intended. Is there anything that you feel like we absolutely need to say before we sign off?
um, I don't think so. Just that, yeah, I think, we mentioned the relational thing and how, yeah, like we said, all of Libra has to do with relationships, but I think this first one is so much more about like like leaving space, the wait and see, letting the other surprise you and letting you
Yeah.
surprise yourself, right? Rather than like tying things down or trying to cling to something, especially at the beginning, can prevent it from blooming into something way more beautiful than you could ever imagine. But yeah,
Yeah.
there's like the power of letting go, and that's basically what relationships are, is like relinquishing control. And Libra one's a really great place to start with that.
Beautiful. Couldn't agree more. All right, you guys, thank you so much for tuning into this episode of Threads of Fate. You can find all of Chloe's work on her website, chloe-margarita.com. She is open for booking. So if you want to snag one of those consult slots, and I know you do, make sure you jump on there. She also has an incredible newsletter on Substack called Recent Bedroom. You can support the continued production of the show by subscribing to my Patreon page on my own website. And if you want more at the Decans because you just can't get enough, check out my Decans guidebook for sale now on www.kirareiberg.com. Thank you so much for being here and for being a part of this exchange of wisdom, this meeting of the minds, if you will, between Chloe and I on a regular basis. We are always so touched by the amount of feedback and support that we get on these episodes, your guys' social media posts, your DMs, your emails. We see them all, we read them, we gab about them to each other, and we just feel really, really lucky that we get to do this. So thank you guys so much for listening halfway through, and we will finish up with the rest of the zodiac in due time. Thank you guys so much for listening, and we will catch you in the next one. Bye.